freelancers who face a lot of different challenges, particularly when it comes to benefits and different types of insurances. The second agenda item will be a follow-up in dealing with food insecurity issues and what can be done to make sure that those food pantries, soup kitchens, and other programs are properly publicized and perhaps expanded as far as promotion goes. When we actually get into each of these agenda items, we're fortunate to have two good speakers handling each, and we'll have Q&A at the end of their individual presentation, I should say their group presentation. So the first two speakers who will deal with the whole concept of helping the independent contractors will speak, and then we'll open the session to Q&A. We'll do the same for food insecurity. But before we begin our program, number one, I'd like to introduce and welcome Susan Evans. I think a lot of you probably know Susan. She's our new public member. Susan served for many years on CB8 and also was the co-chair of the Parks Committee. So we couldn't be more fortunate to have a better public member. Welcome, Susan, and we're delighted that you're here. And before I turn the formal part of the program over to Peggy, Saida, could you go through the housekeeping just for anyone who might be new to one of the CB8 meetings?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. A few notes for you, particularly if this is your first meeting with us. You'll notice that you are muted and unable to mute yourself. After presentations, the co-chairs may call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can ask to be recognized by raising your virtual hand, and you can do that by going to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. It's important not to raise your physical hands or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you among the participants. If you are on a phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute. Once you're recognized by the co-chair, I will unmute you, and you may be prompted to confirm unmuting on your device. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you can access the raise hand feature by clicking the participants button on the menu at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. Also, the chat function is available for technical support only, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. You can send me a chat if you're having any technical issues, and I can help troubleshoot them with you. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to the co-chairs.
Thank you very much, Saida. So good evening, and thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Our first agenda item tonight addresses an issue that many of us tend to overlook, which is the needs of the cities and our communities, freelancers and independent contractors. In New York City, this huge population numbers 1.3 million people, of which 1/3 are independent contractors working on a project-to-project basis, according to 2019 data. These self-employed people work on a wide range of occupations, from the arts to healthcare, law, food services, technology, and beyond. Data show roughly half of them are women. They perform work we all depend on, yet they face distinct financial challenges. Typically, they lack access to such key benefits that workers and organizations get, such as health care subsidized by their employer, other forms of subsidized insurance, paid family leave, and possibly employer matching contributions to a retirement plan. Is anything done to help balance the financial scales and help freelancers and independent contractors, or any legislative proposals in the works that could affect these workers for better or for worse? Tonight, we have two excellent speakers to help us address these issues. Our first speaker is Richard Reibstein, an attorney and expert on independent contractor law. Following his talk, Mercedes Cardona, a full-time independent contractor, will share her views and experiences. After these speakers finish their presentation, we'll have a Q&A session with the audience. We'll now begin by hearing from Mr. Epstein. And if you don't mind, Mr. Epstein, please start by telling us a little more about yourself.
Well, good evening, all. I'm an attorney here in New York, and I have a nationwide practice in independent contractor compliance and misclassification matters. Essentially, independent contractor issues have risen to the top of the visibility chart for labor and employment matters, in large part because they have been so widely used by so many gig economy companies, whether it's Uber Eats, Instacart, and an array of other what has become household names. But independent contractors and freelancers have been around for decades. It's people who wanted to be their own bosses for a lot of good reasons, either because they didn't want to be an employee of someone else and be in that 9 to 5 wheelhouse, or for whatever reason they had certain skills that were not typically those that employers engaged on a regular basis, but rather for a contract basis. Obviously, in addition to that, a lot of folks who are typically in the transportation business or the food delivery and goods delivery business in metropolitan areas have also been swept into the independent contractor field because they have opportunities to provide services to consumers such as us through a connecting arm, such as all of the transportation network companies like Lyft and Uber, or through platforms that will get you groceries and have them delivered, etc. So let's distinguish between traditional independent contractors or so-called freelancers and these gig economy workers. What I hear is the most important part of this discussion deals with the traditional freelancers, people who have been independent contractors for a long time. And they know that this is what they're engaged for. They have separate business tax returns. They take off all of their expenses under the 2017 tax bill. They actually get a 20% qualified business income deduction, which is very helpful. So things on the downside is independent contractors have to pay both halves of their self-employment tax. Employees pay 7.65%, employers pay 7.65%, independent contractors pay both halves. It's overwhelmed by their qualified business income deduction that is currently in play, but nonetheless, that is an additional cost. As has been indicated, they're not eligible for any employment-related benefits. No health insurance, no vacation pay, no retirement benefits, but that's always been the case because the laws in this country have only provided those types of benefits with rare exceptions to employees. Those are mostly federal laws. Every now and then there's some state laws involved, but even the state laws are essentially employee-based. So to the extent people want to extend those types of benefits to independent contractors, it ain't going to happen. That's not the way our country's benefit laws have been legislated for the last 50 to 75 years. It just doesn't happen that way. Unemployment, except in the pandemic, has always been limited only to employees. Workers' comp has only been available to employees and not independent contractors. So what is very important, however, is what is an independent contractor? In New York State and under federal law, there are different tests. There are more tests than there are people on this Zoom call because each state has several tests for different laws. And then there are different states, each of whom have different tests, some of which sound similar but apply differently. And the federal laws each have their own separate tests. So it would be a very difficult thing just to write down on a piece of paper. Probably need around 4 to 8 pieces of paper, every test that applies. Many of them are very similar, however. In New York in 2017, there was a very important law that was passed. It's called the Freelance Isn't Free Act anymore. That does go a long way to protecting abuses of independent contractors or freelancers who have performed services but haven't gotten paid according to the terms of their agreed upon relationship with the party who's been provided the services. That law is the first of its kind in the nation, and it hasn't been replicated anywhere else. There are double damages if independent contractor freelancers haven't been paid their agreed upon compensation. The law, however, is not very well drafted. And I say that because it's unclear exactly who the law applies to. On the face of it, it only applies to individuals operating a one-person shop. Well, you can have a one-person shop, and Mercedes may have a one-person shop, but she may ask somebody else to do some word processing for her, some photocopying for her. Well, if that's the case, Mercedes may not be covered under the law anymore, because it only covers individuals who are performing their own services and not those who actually have any employees or helpers or independent contractors. Indeed, Mercedes herself could be a hiring party and required to comply with the independent contractor law in New York if she did engage people to do some support services for her. But the law generally is very favorable in that it does require payment for services. Evidently, there was some testimony before the city council that a lot of freelancers were being stiffed, sufficient that the city council felt it was important to put into effect a law that was ultimately signed by the mayor that does give certain levels of protection for payment. And there is actually, under the Department of Consumer Affairs, a website that goes over that law, provides a sample contract, which is extremely basic, and has a complaint form for people who have not received their payment. And if they wanted to, they could go into court. Although that probably is something that has not yet been utilized very often. There also has been in recent, in the last 6 months, a law that has gone into effect, a series of laws protecting those people we talked about earlier, the gig economy workers in New York City with respect to delivering food and other goods throughout the city. Interestingly enough, they're covered by the Freelance Isn't Free Act, and that only means that they have a contract in writing with their names and the names of the party who's hiring them, and an agreement that they're going to be paid within 30 days unless the agreement specifies some other payment form. I don't think that law really, the Freelance Isn't Free law, is meaningful with regard to those sets of freelancers and independent contractors, because they are probably paid on a regular basis by direct deposit to a banking account. But the law is an effort to have those sets of freelancers or independent contractors be given certain protections for those things that are most significant to that group of workers. And that is the opportunity to make sure that they have limitations on what deductions can be made from their compensation, that their fees are set forth in writing, that there be minimum fees set for deliveries, and they have access to bathroom facilities in the restaurants that they service. With that, I'd like to basically say that most important thing with regard to independent contracting in this country and the developments over the past, 5 to 10 years with regard to gig economy is that there are opportunities to make money now that have never been available before for those who are not employed. There has been a study by the Pew Research Center recently that indicated that an overwhelming number of people who are independent contractors in this country are having a gig job or whatever you would refer to, an engagement, because it's a second job in effect. It's a means to support and supplement their income from regular employment. That's not typically what we think about with freelancers. We typically think of them as that's what they do for their main job. And Mercedes may be a full-time freelancer, or maybe this is a second type of position that she has. But more importantly, most of those people surveyed, these are adult Americans, were very comfortable with the fact that they regard those individuals as independent contractors and not employees. And second, that they feel more than 2 to 1 that the government should leave the status quo the way it is and not change things. Now, unfortunately, change, which is among a number of stymied bills, on Capitol Hill right now, would probably mean the end to most freelancers, because the more that is legislated to make it too costly for companies to engage freelancers and others with gig economy work, the fewer gig economy opportunities there will be for freelancers. There is a balance. As even under the Obama administration, the gentleman who has recently been nominated to be the wage and hour administrator, who was the wage and hour administrator under the Obama administration, said that, and I quote this frequently in my blog on different items that come up to discuss, that independent contractors are a vital part of the US economy, always has been. What the government wants to prevent is the misclassification of people who are misclassified, especially those intentionally, as independent contractors when they should be treated as employees. I don't see this, meeting, today for CB8's committee here really addressing that. But I do want to mention that legislation can be a double-edged sword. With the 2021 legislation dealing with, the 2017 legislation and the 2021 legislation dealing with the people who make deliveries in the city council wisely did not enter the very adversarial area of determining who is an independent contractor and who is not. Instead, they said all those persons regarded by the hiring party as independent contractors are entitled to certain protections. We're going to give them that. We're not going to wade into the battle as to who is and who is not an independent contractor. That's for other people to argue about. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mercedes, who is, as indicated, a freelancer here in New York City, to hear what she has to say. Criticize all you like, Mercedes, anything that I said, support what it is, but it's always helpful to hear about someone who is from someone who's an actual stakeholder.
Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting and helpful, and we'll be getting back to you after Mercedes speaks with some questions. But I first want to introduce Mercedes. I have to tell you all that she is a longtime friend of mine, and Mercedes is a full-time writer, journalist, and also marketing guru. And she makes a fine living as an independent contractor, but it's not necessarily an easy row to hoe. So with that, I want to turn us over to Mercedes, who will explain about what she does and what she's up against and what she thinks of efforts to help freelancers. So Mercedes, you're on.
Oh, thank you, Peggy. I have to agree with a number of things that the previous speaker said. Yes, there's a lot of issues, legal issues that are involved in being a freelancer. And but the bottom line is it always comes down to money, because that if you're a freelancer, that is what you spend a lot of time worrying about. I am a full-time freelancer, and I do have a second job running my freelance business. So basically, I spend part of my time doing my work and the other part, doing paperwork to get work, keep work, and get paid for that work. And that's pretty much the life that a lot of full-time freelancers have to lead. You have to be very pragmatic if you're a freelancer, because a lot of it has to do with the cash flow coming in and the cash flow going out. Because as was mentioned earlier, as a freelancer, you are not eligible for any of the benefits that employees get. So you have to find a way to cobble together that safety net for yourself, or else risk losing everything. You are one car crash away from being broke if you don't have health insurance. So as a freelancer, in my personal experience, I have health insurance, I have dental insurance, I have long-term care insurance, very important for freelancers because we don't get disability payments from an employer, we don't get sick leave. So if you get in a situation where you are out of work for a longer period of time than a few days because you're either ill or injured, and you need that insurance to fill in the gaps beyond your health insurance and keep you relatively solvent. So definitely health insurance is a very important expense that you can't get out of. And unfortunately, for a sole proprietor or a single, one individual, it's there's limited choices when it comes to getting health insurance that you can afford. I mean, if you're willing to pay thousands of dollars a month, I'm sure that United Healthcare or Aetna or anybody will be willing to sell you a policy. But if you want to be able to, have money left to keep a roof over your head and eat, you may end up probably getting your insurance from the state exchange, AKA Obamacare. And that has its own pluses and minuses that you have to weigh when you're going in, but I would highly recommend it because, not having health insurance is really no way to operate a business of any kind. Beyond that, I mean, there are other situations. I was actually one of those people who benefited from the expansion of unemployment benefits to freelancers at the start of the pandemic, because I don't know if you recall March of 2020, it was as if the lights went out. Last time I remember things being that dire was September 2008, when I was just starting freelancing, and basically the bottom fell out of the US economy, and it was 6 months, 9 months before I got any work. And at that time, there was no they made no unemployment benefits available to freelancers. I had to live off of my savings and then my credit cards. And it took quite a while to pull myself out of that debt spiral and get the business running. But, now going on 14 years later, things are much better. And part of it was thanks to the expansion of unemployment benefits to freelancers at the start of the pandemic, which helped me, keep things on an even keel until work started coming in. And actually, it did start coming in pretty strongly in the summer of 2020. What I have noticed is on the skilled side of the equation, I'm not talking about, Uber drivers or what the mayor calls low-skilled employees. On the professional services side, which is where I'm working, there's been the tremendous demand for freelance work. I brought in 6 new clients last year and another 2 in the last month, because a lot of companies are a little wary of hiring people full time, because just when we thought we were out of this Delta surge, we got Omicron coming in. So there's a sense of uneasiness in terms of hiring people full time, but the work still has to get done. So where do you turn? Freelancers is where you turn to. And it's been a lot of work for freelancers. So that has been a good thing that's come out of this. But at the same time, in the long term, the conditions for freelancers haven't really changed that much. I'm delighted that they passed the Freelancers and Free Act, but from my own personal experience, it's a little toothless. And I did have an experience about just before the pandemic in 2019. I was chasing after a client who owed me a rather significant amount of money, too large to go to small claims court. And I actually went through the process of putting in a complaint under the Freelancers and Free Act. And it proved to be a bit of a, I wouldn't say a wild goose chase or anything like that, but in truth, all they really could do was send an email to the person that I had been emailing constantly to collect my money, and then give me a list of lawyers and tell me to go sue the guy. And I was ready to do that when he finally relented and paid me. But essentially, for a case of non-payment, your only recourse is go to court. And that means you got to hire a lawyer, and they don't work for free. And you got to hire a process server to serve the papers when you sue. And even if you win, after all is said and done, yeah, you get double damages, but can you collect? That's the person I was suing was an LLC as well. So he could have very easily just thrown up his hands, declared bankruptcy, and that's a whole other process if you want to collect. So in terms of the law protecting freelancers, yes, there is statute, but there is a difference between statute and practice. And in terms of contracts, most contracts have lengthy boilerplate that tends to favor whomever writes the contract. So my suggestion to any freelancers is you develop your own boilerplate contract that you can use with any potential client, and make sure that it gets read by a lawyer, that you know what you're doing, and that it favors you whenever possible, or puts as many protections on your behalf when you're working. Because in truth, the statute is fine, but from the statute to the practice, there's a bit of a distance, and you have to be very pragmatic. If it's going to cost you more to sue someone than you're actually owed, you may win a moral victory and the high ground is all yours, but the high ground has no price tag, so you'll get no money out of it. You have to weigh all those things. And just briefly, I think a lot of what freelancers need to do is just to be very financially savvy, very pragmatic, and lean into your relationships, because the best way to avoid getting stiffed by a client is to only deal with clients that are known to you. Right now, most of my work, actually all of my work right now, all of the clients I have today have come in through referrals. And that has been very useful, because I haven't gotten stiffed by a client in 3 years. Unfortunately, the guy who almost stiffed me was also a referral, but that's another story. Speaking of financial and referrals, you need to be also, I wish there was more policing of scams targeting freelancers, which is an unfortunate downside of what we're seeing today with all these freelancers. I was recently came within an inch of falling into one of these scams, someone who reached in over LinkedIn promising a very large contract. And I started getting a little suspicious, because it was a lot of money, and they were offering, oh, we'll pay you 50% up front, another 50% when you deliver the manuscript. And very rarely do you get a client that's that generous up front. And I later, in talking to other people, once this so-called client ghosted me, there were some people who said, this could have been a refund scam, where they sign you up for a contract with a really fat fee, and they tell you they're going to send you an amount up front, and they send you more than they told you they would, and then ask you to refund them the difference. And then once you do, the check they gave you bounces, or the PayPal transfer gets canceled, and they take your money. So I think a lot of what needs to be done in the freelance protection side is very close to just plain old consumer protection, preventing scams and non-payment. And yes, I agree with your other speaker about misclassification of freelancers. There's this term permalancer that gets thrown around a lot. And it's basically someone who's working full-time all the time under an independent contractor arrangement. And essentially, it's a full-time employee without benefits, which is very beneficial to the person signing the checks, not so much to the employee / freelancer, contractor, whatever they may be. So perhaps the idea of permalancers is something that should be explored more deeply. And with that, having completely depressed everyone who's listening, I do want to leave you with on an up note. Yes, there is room for freelancers. There is obviously a need, and smart, savvy freelancers who build on their relationships can do very well in this environment. But we do need to have an understanding of what the business is like and the environment is like. Just be very, very pragmatic and hire a good lawyer. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Peggy again.
Thank you very much for that enlightening description. That was very helpful. Thank you, Mercedes. So we are going to have a question and answer. And so anybody with a question is asked to please, under reactions, click the raised hand function. So, and we already have 2 hands up. So we'll start with the first hand, which is Rita Popper.
Hi, Mercedes. I have been a freelancer. I've been a regular employee. One of the last jobs that I had as an employee, was doing films in California. These were sales films. And the interesting part is because most of the people in LA are freelancers. You know, the job ends, the film ends, you wait for the next job. They had a law that they had to be paid within 10 days. I will tell you that when I started out with a Fortune 500 company, that they paid between 4 and 6 months. So what do? I mean, if you make a big stink, you're not going to get any more work from them. There's always something green at the end of the rainbow or whatever. But I wondered if it wouldn't be possible to protect freelancers and getting them paid within a regulated time period.
Actually, does Mr. Epstein want to answer that, or?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The statement that Mercedes stated, which was to get a good lawyer, it may escape the lawyer what you need. Every independent contractor may have different needs. For someone such as yourself in that particular industry, you're going to want to put in there that payment must be made within X number of days. If it's not going to be paid for 4 to 6 months, then you have to decide whether you can afford the delayed payment. So it's basically a business leverage decision. If you're that valuable that they desperately want you, they might pay you within the time set forth in your contract. I think it is very important, however, to speak to those people that are getting your services before you provide them, so that they understand and can tell their paymaster, hey, this person we agreed we're going to pay within this period of time, and I need his or her services again. So yes, you may be concerned that you're never going to get hired again. If you become the squeaky wheel, you have to become the one with the greater leverage. If what you're doing is no different than what everybody else is doing and you're replaceable with somebody else, then plainly there is no leverage, and you just have to rely on the fact that you will eventually get paid. That's a lot different than what Mercedes was talking about, someone who stiffed her. So you just have to anticipate that your revenue will be coming in 4 to 6 months.
Thank you very much. Alita, Lita's hand is up. You have a question?
Oh, more just a comment. Thanks, Peggy. Just for those who don't know, the Single Payer Health Act that is going through Albany will be putting, again, all of the entire healthcare costs on the freelancers and independent contractors. The way I also work as an independent contractor, the way I have to pay all of my social security and everything else like that is what everyone will be having to do with the Single Payer Health Act if that passes. So I don't know the details, but I think a lot of people are not aware that this is a possibility. And so I wanted to alert the freelancers, the independent contractors out there. Thanks, Peggy.
Yeah, and I'd like to, before we go to Susan, hi, Susan. So I'd like to ask both Mr. Epstein, Richard, and Mercedes to quickly comment on that, this proposal in the proposed New York health law that would call on independent contractors to pay the full freight of their health care, even though
that's no different than what we're doing right now. I mean, I'm paying, I don't want to tell you the exact amount because it'll probably make you cry, but I am paying a decent amount of money for my health insurance. I am also paying for dental insurance, which actually I don't get from the exchange because I can't find a dentist who'll take any of the exchange plans. So I actually go to the AARP. And I got their dental insurance, and in my long-term care insurance, I pay full freight for all of those things. So I don't see, and maybe Richard can, I'm sorry, Richard, yeah, maybe our lawyer friend can explain a little better what the difference is here. But frankly, from where I'm sitting, I don't see any difference at all.
Well, it seems to me if they're going to pass a law requiring people to be in this plan, which is what the Health Act does do, everyone in New York State has to be in it. You don't get a choice. You can't opt out and do something else, get private insurance. So you have to be in this plan. Therefore, if one set of workers has to pay the full freight and other set of workers don't have to pay the full freight, I'm wondering about the economic justice of this, but it seems to me, and I'm just talking personally, it seems like it could be fine if there were some sort of state subsidy for people that are not getting subsidized by their employer. And but I thought that was, I just like to real quick, before we move on to Susan, I'd just like to real quick ask Richard what his take on this proviso is.
Peggy, I'm not familiar with that, and it's not
Okay.
something that I would normally do. And I have a very hard stop at 7:15. So
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move.
Peggy, could I just mention
Yeah.
that they're looking to the payment by employers and independent contractors to fund the entire health plan. So I don't know whether it will be more or less than insurance on the exchange or anything else, but that's where the funding for the plan, they say, will come from. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan? Could Susan
Susan,
be?
you can confirm unmuting on your device. Susan Evans, could you confirm unmuting?
Susan?
I don't think she can hear. Confirm unmuting on your device, Susan. There you go.
Oh,
Did you have a question, Susan?
I wonder if she can hear.
well, I guess we should move on. Elaine?
I'm sorry I joined late, but I have found that the nonprofit sector has really been violating the worker rights of professionals by hiring professionals really as contractors, but they are working on site, they get support, etc., which is a violation of independent contractors. I'm not sure if that was dealt with, but I do think that this is something that needs to go to the New York State Department of Labor, because these agencies are compromising and cheating.
Oh, they actually, some of these, and I was once in a situation like that, not with a nonprofit. This was actually with a publisher that I was working with. And what they do is they funnel those employees through an employment agency.
No.
That basically places, they hire you, but it's an employment agency that's handling your timesheet and your paycheck, and it insulates them from the situation. But it's one of these permalancer agreements that I was talking about, where you are in the office 40 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
But because everything is going through the employment agency, you're essentially a temp worker.
What is sad about that is that the ads come from the agency itself, not from the employment agency. And I really do. And I'm a social worker, and I saw this with so many social workers being hired this way. It's the professionals. Mm-hmm. So it crosses the board of who's being violated about their rights. And I think it
is what Richard was talking about misclassification of freelancers, of employees as independent contractors. And yeah, so there is a gap there in the law that ought to be addressed.
Thank you.
Susan, do we have Susan now?
Confirm unmuting, Susan.
She's having problems unmuting, Peggy.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. So do we have any other questions or no?
I think Susan was able to unmute.
Actually, for Mercedes, you said that you were able to secure more employment, more contracts during COVID in the past couple of years. Do you find that employers, because they need your services, are more generous in their compensation, or or do they figure, let's just go in the opposite direction? I was just wondering.
Well, you know, actually, I don't know if it's the situation. I am getting paid well, well enough in the last couple of years. And a lot of it also is because I have insisted. I put my foot down and I have turned down work.
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, I have found that I have put my foot down, and after 13, almost 14 years freelancing, I have started to build enough of a practice that I can demand, okay, I will not accept less than this amount for a job. And I have turned down work because it just seemed to be, it's not worth, I could make a living doing things at this rate, but I would have to be working in my sleep to make enough money to pay my bills. So no, sorry, I can't. And it, after all these years, it's actually started to work in my favor, not accepting low rate work.
Good for you. Terrific.
But yeah, there are moments where, when a week goes by and nothing's come, no assignments have come in, that, there's always that moment where you go, oh my God, maybe I overreached. But no, it's worked out eventually. But, it takes a lot of, like I said, you have to be very pragmatic. It's like, yeah, I could get work writing stories for $100 a pop. I would have to write something like, 30 or 40 a month just to be able to cover, keep a roof over my head here in New York City. So, how many hours in a day? So you just have to be very pragmatic, and sometimes you got to draw a line. But yes, and I also think that there's been a bit of a come to Jesus moment, at least in my industry, in publishing and marketing, where, people have started to realize you get what you pay for. And maybe you ought to pay better if you want better. Because there was a moment there where, people wanted you to write for nothing. Oh, write for the exposure. Well, Con Ed doesn't get paid with exposure. I don't keep the lights on with exposure. I don't pay my co-op, bills with exposure. So no, thank you. And it started, I think things have started to turn where, as freelancing has become a more established part of business, people are starting to take it a little bit more seriously. And, they're starting to make budget lines for paying freelancers. I have noticed that in the last couple of years, usually the first quarter is dead because the end of the year comes, people see their budgets and realize how much money they spend and start yelling at their people. No, don't spend money. Don't hire those freelancers. Don't spend money on that. No. And then somewhere around March, they realize, oh my God, we got all this pileup of work we got to get through and we don't have anyone to do it. And then they run out and start hiring freelancers in the second quarter. And I have not seen that happen in the last 2 years. So I feel encouraged by that.
Thank you. So are we able to get Susan at all? Or
I think I heard her.
Susan,
confirm unmuting on your device. Something should, there you go.
There.
We can hear you now.
Okay,
Okay.
great. I'd like to thank both the speakers. They were incredibly informative, and I used to have a small business of my own. And so in a sense, I feel I was a freelancer, though as a business owner. So I'm sure there were a lot of distinctions. I do have a question that maybe Peggy or Gail could answer. What could we do if this Single Payer Healthcare Act goes through and Mercedes also. What can we do to stop it or to try to change what they're proposing to pay freelancers, which is basically nothing for healthcare? And that's, if I were a freelancer, I think it's a very frightening act that may be coming down the pike. So if anyone has any suggestions about what that can be done in the near future, if this act does come through, I'd be happy to hear it.
I think Rebecca Dangor has her hand up, perhaps in response. Is Rebecca here?
Hi, I thought I would just first fully explain the how it's being paid for, which includes the specificities for freelance employers. So there are two components: a payroll tax and a non-payroll income tax, both of which will be progressively graduated. The payroll tax for employed individuals will be paid 20% by the employee and 80% by the employer. An employer can additionally pay for some or all of the employee's share. A self-employed individual will pay the full tax. The first $25,000 of income will be exempt, and if you are on Medicare, the first $50,000 of income will be exempt. So I just thought I would, that's from the language from the bill. And in terms of if you're opposed or supportive of the bill, it's back in Albany this session. The primary sponsor, Dick Gottfried, it's his last term, and this is kind of his big, you know, he's been working on this for a long time. So I don't know if this year is going to be different from every other year. It hasn't moved forward. It has passed the Assembly previously multiple times. It has not passed the Senate. And you can write to all of your state representatives with your thoughts. And you can also reach out to Dick Gottfried's office with particular concerns when it comes to freelance employees. So I hope some or any of that is helpful.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, I just want to conclude this portion with a question of my own, if I might. I'd like to ask Richard. So Richard, Richard's gone. Is Richard
I think he's,
still?
yes, I think he said he had a hard stop at 7:15.
Okay, all right. Well, we're gonna, with that, we will, well, let me ask a quick question and then we'll move on. Does anybody want to, Richard was saying that it wouldn't be helpful to pass new laws or new regulations or whatever on freelancers. He believes it would make things even harder on him, or that's what he said. Does anybody want to follow up on that point with any kind of resolution, or is there something somebody thinks that we should follow up on regarding the situation, the financial situation with freelancers? Is there anything people want to pursue? Nope. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. And Gail's going to take it from here.
In way of background, in March 2020, the Women and Families Committee researched and distributed a white paper on how to secure food during the pandemic. And what we found, it was very difficult to really locate the number of food pantries, soup kitchens, and other programs that were available. But we managed to put together a fairly significant list, and then we updated it later that year. The following March of 2021, we then had a meeting which focused on food insecurity a year after the pandemic. And we certainly were fortunate to have one of our speakers tonight, Greg Morris, and his staff involved in that discussion, as well as one of the program individuals from the Food Bank for New York City. But what we were finding is it's still difficult. We get feedback that people don't always know where they can go. And our concern is that the New York Health Foundation found in March of last year that 12% of adult New Yorkers sometimes do not have enough to eat. And sadly, 20% of households with children experience food insecurity. So we would like to have our speakers address, number one, what their programs do, but also any creative thoughts as to how we can publicize or expand the food services that are currently available. Our first speaker is a member of Community Board 8. Greg Morris is the president and the executive director of Stanley and Isaac's Neighborhood Center, which has done a yeoman's job for the community, and all during the pandemic has been open and providing services to members of our community. So we'll start with hearing from Greg. Greg.
Thank you so much. And if with your permission, Gail, I'd love for you to unmute my colleague, Aaron Rooney, who has joined us. He's the Associate Deputy Executive Director. And I'm going to give him an opportunity to jump in a second. And I'll just start by saying, I hope you are all well this evening. It's great to see you all. Thank you for the robust starting conversation about independent contractors. Very familiar with that world. I want to say this about hunger and food insecurity as identified by Gail, and as this committee knows, hunger and food insecurity was significant before the pandemic. It continues to be significant today. And we are of the opinion that our city's recovery, it's going to be critical in thinking about our city's recovery and to address the significant food insecurity needs that exist in our communities. And, in terms of where we were at the beginning of the pandemic, where there were lengthy lines, I would argue that while there have been lulls in sometimes in the way in which folks gather, the reality is in this district, at our organization, at others around the city, while the impression might have been that food insecurity has been addressed, while there may have been an impression that sort of the hunger spike that we saw has declined, I think we can safely say, and Aaron, I'll turn this over to you, I think we can safely say that those needs still exist. They're more significant perhaps than ever. And it's interesting over the course of time to see how it's deepened in some cases for some of the residents and community members we see. Aaron, on that note, I'll pass it over to you and you can talk about the Isaac Center, and then we can talk about how to spread the word and how this committee and the community board can do more to try to meet this need.
Great, thank you, Greg.
Sure, thanks, Greg. So as Greg said, I'm Aaron Rooney. I oversee aging services at Isaac Center. And I also oversee our food bank program, or our food pantry program. And I want to talk not just about aging services, but about how we're gaining access to families and everybody else through the food bank and food pantry programs. So we are open. I want to start by saying that Isaac Center is open. We are open for older adults and community members to come in for grab and go meals. Meals are served every day, 11:30, so you can walk in. We have a small capacity in the dining room. I think we're right now saying 10 to 15 can sit socially distanced in the dining room. So that's happening. We also have Meals on Wheels. That's a big program at Isaac Center, and that's still available for folks over 60 that are homebound. And then we have 2 food bank programs. So we partner with Common Pantry, which provides food pantry delivery or pickup for folks that are over 60 that make less than $1,300 a month. And that's, that's something that's been going on at Isaac Center for the last 4 or 5 years. And now we're up to 180 a month, I believe. Excuse me 1 second.
Let me jump in and add a note while Aaron gathers. The other note I want to mention is that the Isaac Center is also responsible in Manhattan for something called recovery meals. So for those of you who may have been familiar with a certain period of time where the city operated something called the Get Food program, this was a program where during the pandemic, if community members needed access to food, home delivery of food, there was a trigger where you could get online, you could get food, and they would actually come to your house and deliver something like 9 meals at a time. And actually, there was a lot of feedback on this meals program that was offered by the city, some of it not so positive. Sometimes people were receiving meals that were not exactly healthy or nutritious, pictures and food being circulated of folks getting pictures of candy bars and hamburgers. And that program has since come to an end. It came to the end in the fall. And at that point, it transitioned to something called a recovery meals program. And so right now, the Atheists Center is responsible for the delivery of meals to older adults who are in need of access to services and food, meaning food and hunger and security issues. Right now, I think we're at 3,000 Manhattanites, meaning not just in Upper East Side, but across Manhattan, receiving access to meal delivery twice a week, receiving 3 to 4 meals per delivery to be able to meet some basic needs. Of note here, by the way, Aaron referenced home delivered meals, and I'll pass it back over to you, Aaron, for the food bank component. I'll just also note, when we talk about home delivered meals, we talk about recovery meals, talk about grab and go meals. Oftentimes, it's a very minimal number of meals that folks are receiving. If it were up to me and it was up to Aaron, it was up to anybody who's in this business, we would be providing a lot more. The reality is meeting the sort of financial obligations that are provided to us, contractual needs. Oftentimes it's a circumstance where we are funded to get a meal out or a handful of meals out, when the reality is we know no less than 3 meals a day is essential to help people stay healthy and to be able to get the nutrients and support that they need. Aaron, I'll pass it back over to you for
yes, my apologies. You had an emergency glass of water there, but so anyways, we are open as a food bank. So if you're over 60, make less than $1,300 a month, you are welcome to get a food delivery. This is in partnership with New York Common Pantry. We're up to over 180 per month. So that is something that we can get you set up, and I will share the sort of contact information you'll need for these in a moment. And then this last year during the pandemic, early on, we partnered with Food Bank of New York, and we became full membership partners with Food Bank. So we are now able to extend Food Pantry to folks under 60. So anybody is eligible for that. And it's grown tremendously in the last year. Right now, we are available to do that as a walk-in on Wednesdays between 10 and 1. So you can walk into Isaac Center between 10 and 1 on Wednesdays, and they can set you up. There's a few questions, but they're not invasive, and we don't turn people away. And you can get set up for that. And then it'll be on a schedule where you'll get a call to know when you can come again. And it's open to everybody. So older adults and families can come in for that. And then you can also sign up in advance through Alberto, and I'll share his information. Alberto Rivera is our manager for Food Bank. And it's unique because we offer both pickup and delivery. So we're moving towards more of a pickup model as the capacity grows and builds. But we want to make sure that folks that are homebound or are more safe at home, frankly, at the moment, have access to Food Pantry, and that we can get that to them. So this is happening. We're there every day. Folks can stop in and ask about it, or you can contact Alberto, and I'll put his information in the chat momentarily so you can do that. So grab and go meals every day, hot meals 11:30 Monday through Friday. Meals on Wheels, that's a referral system through Isaac Center for folks that are homebound and over 60. And then we have 2 resources for Pantry. So that's all happening at Isaac's. I know there are other resources in the community for Pantry, which includes the Urban Outreach Center, which is across the street. I just looking on their website, they're available on Wednesdays and Fridays from 9 to 1. I don't know too many details about that, but I do see them out there. They're doing good work. They're getting food to the community. So they're a good partner for us. So I'll pause there. Does anybody have any questions about Isaac Center or Food Pantry in general?
I think what we'll do, Aaron, is when you guys finish, then we'll go on to Dave Liston and then open up to questions and answers for both speakers. Okay.
Sounds good.
Greg, was there anything else that you wanted to
Yeah, I'll just say this. I mean, look, Isaac Center, like many other providers, whether it's Lenox Hill Neighborhood House or Carter Burden, multi-service providers, often multi-generational, are doing very similar things. The Isaac Center also has a job training program for young adults who are teaching kids to cook, young adults to cook, to find career paths in this regard. As Aaron referenced, the Urban Outreach Center does a fantastic job. And the reality is your white paper was really strong, and many of these resources are still available. I just want to note for everybody here, in terms of communication, I think the starting point on some level is to talk about what it is we think our neighbors should have access to, and how it is that we want to organize and advocate for the resources to ensure that no one is without access to food and nutrition opportunities. I mention that because, as I noted a minute ago, city contracts sort of tell the story of as if one meal is enough. And I don't think anybody thinks that's the case. Resources don't necessarily always come to us to be able to meet and expand our kitchen. We have a fantastic kitchen here, like other providers do, that we would love to run around the clock to make sure that we're getting more meals out to our neighbors, but those resources aren't necessarily available to us to do it. And I say all that to say, I think the starting point on some levels to determine how it is that we want to confront, address, advocate for the access to the resources that are required to see that no one goes hungry, no family, no child, no older adult. The white paper was fantastic. It's a building block.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Liston. David is also a former member of Community Board 8, and he served as chair of the board. David is a very active participant at the Holy Trinity Church, and as I understand it, David, you were a past president of Trinity Church Neighborhood Center. And I know that Trinity was also open all during the pandemic. So if you could just join us now and give us some background on what the church does, as well as your thoughts, such as Greg's, next steps, what kind of strategic approach we can have to ensure that people in our neighborhood are getting fed.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, Peggy. And it's so nice to see some familiar faces and many new faces. I have such great memories about being on the board, and it's so good to see Susan, Alita, Elaine, Gail, Will. I hope I'm not going to forget anybody. Rita, did I mention Rita? I've missed you guys. And there's, as you all know, there's nothing like being on a community board to make you feel a part of your community. And I miss that very much, but I do continue to remain involved in the community. And I think, like a lot of people, I'm a volunteer. What I'm involved with is called the Holy Trinity Neighborhood Center. It is historically connected to the Church of the Holy Trinity, and it is located on the grounds of the Holy Trinity Church. And it gets support from the church and many volunteers from the church, but it is actually separately incorporated, and it's non-denominational. The name might suggest otherwise, but it actually is non-denominational. And we have a board that's made up of Mormons, friends from the temple down the street, Muslims. Recently, I saw on Facebook, someone was promoting our neighborhood supper, and the person was affiliated with a group called Atheists Against Hunger. And that's when I thought, we are doing something right. We really are, because we're getting so many people involved from so many different faiths all their own, no faith at all. But what we all have in common is we are volunteers. It's a completely volunteer-driven organization, and we are supported entirely by the help of the volunteers and donations from people in the community. We offer, and have offered for many years, a number of different programs on a much smaller scale than anything that the Isaac Center offers. Listening to you guys was very inspiring and humbling. And I'm really impressed and grateful to you and so many organizations like you for what you do. What we do is on a much smaller scale, but I think it is important and effective. We offer a weekly lunch to senior citizens. It's the senior lunch. We provide we have a shelter 7 nights a week for men who are homeless but are close to perhaps not being homeless. What we've learned is that a lot of times the cycle of homelessness continues because someone doesn't have a stable place to call home every night. And so we try to address that concern by providing a shelter to the same group of men each night. We have a Thanksgiving dinner program, which we deliver food to homebound neighbors. The event that's very near and dear to my heart, I'm particularly active with, is the neighborhood supper. That's every Saturday. Prior to the pandemic, we offered a sit-down meal prepared and served by volunteers, a hot meal on real plates. It wasn't grab and go. It was sit down with your neighbors, use real silverware, have a several course meal, a healthy, nutritious meal, and get food and fellowship. And sadly, we've not been able to continue that during the pandemic. Like a lot of programs, we've only been able to really prepare the food inside, and then we go out to the garden at the Church of the Holy Trinity and we provide the food to go. I think that's still important. We're helping to feed people. But I definitely look forward to the day when we can actually welcome people back in and sit down together and really have the sense of fellowship that I think is just as important as food, or nearly as important. A lot of our guests are lonely. A lot of our guests have no sense of community or continuity. What we do is very similar to what many other local block associations do, other faith-based organizations do. In terms of how we get the word out, I will say this on a good note, on a happy note. You know, when I talk to the guests at our supper, they will rattle off 3 different places, 7 days a week that they go to: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There are so many programs on the Upper East Side, and not enough, of course. So on the one hand, I get the sense that there's definitely, the word is getting out. I think your white paper helped. I know that the Coalition for Shelter, and I see there's someone here, I think I saw, Anne, right? So you guys put out the street sheet, right? And on your website, there's also a document that you can click the link and it takes you to a list of programs like ours on the Upper East Side. That is invaluable. We print out those documents, including the street sheet and the other document that you have, and we put it in our lunches the dinners that we give out to go, and we hand it out to people. And I know a number of guests carry those around with them. So in terms of trying to get the word out about the available programs, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think we just need more wheels. I think we need to get more of these sheets into the hands of the people who need them. A couple of thoughts I had on that might be perhaps at the community board meetings. I don't know if you guys have those flyers out there. I know you have so many other flyers, but if board members could stick a few of them in their pockets, when you see someone who's hungry or putting out their hand seeking help, it's up to you whether you give them money or not. That's your decision. But whether you do or you don't, you might also hand them this piece of paper, because it could really make the difference between eating and not eating if they just know where to go and when to go. I hope all that's helpful. I look forward to answering any questions.
It certainly is. And we have several hands up. We're going to start with Elaine Walsh. Could you unmute Elaine? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. How sad to hear of this. I've been working in the community, in the social service, et cetera, for a good 25 plus years, if not more. I can't count anymore. My question, and I support all of what the voluntary groups are doing through the churches. I'm excluding right now Stanley Isaacs because there is a contract that you have to do a lot of this. And from Coalition, I'm not sure of your funding. But what I know in our neighborhood is a commitment to those who are in need, whether it's through food, shelter, after school activities, etc. Yet our city does not see our neighborhood as doing anything nor having any needs. I've had this discussion with city officials. And when they say to me, well, we're going to do X to your neighborhood because you don't do fair share, I say to them, tell me what you mean by fair share. And then they go, oh, maybe we don't need that. That's right, because I've done and identified fair share, whether it's AIDS programs, homeless, food, elderly, etc. My question, and I think I'm doing this from an advocacy perspective, do you think that the city is providing appropriate and sufficient funding to our community when we have the largest elderly population in the city? And based on that response, how do we move forward from this day to say enough is enough? We need to help our neighbors. And it's not just about volunteering, but it's also the government providing resources. And this is important because it's quality of life. Our elderly population, for the most part, is in walk-ups, in tenements that now are at risk because the city wants to get rid of our RAP. I know you don't want to hear me go on, but I could go on. I am so upset with what's going on. And David, I'm glad to hear about Holy Trinity. Greg, I know Stanley Isaacs. Look, I'm a social worker. I know the programs, but I am looking, and Anne, indeed, I know the coalition. I don't want any of them to be forgotten, but how do we, as a community, start to say, we need the resources in this neighborhood, not just from the volunteers and the donors, because we're perceived as quote unquote the wealthy neighborhood, which is not true, particularly east of Lexington. But how do we move forward with all the groups? David, I want to see you take some lead on this, to say to the city, no more. Let us help our community. We're as needy as every other community. Thank you. I'm sorry I went on, but you got me at a bad time that I'm tired. Thank you.
Greg, would you like to respond?
Specific to meeting the needs of older adults, I'm going to defer to my colleague, Aaron Rooney, who has led aging services in this neighborhood and is well networked on the east side of Manhattan in terms of thinking about older adults. Aaron, do you think we're doing enough? What more do we need to do?
Well, Elaine, it's, you're music to my ears to hear that, folks care about more resources for older adults in our community. I've been at Isaacs for 10 years, and I think you're absolutely right. I think folks talk about our zip code as being affluent and wealthy and not having needs. So we're left out of a lot of conversations and left out of a lot of resources. So I think that at Isaacs, we've tried to be smart and take we have what we call a hybrid model. So we have different types of contracts in the city, and we try to make the most of those and try to be thoughtful with our resources. And programs like Food Bank and that we partner with the schools and things like that that don't come from government contracts or not those direct ones like the Norkin Senior Center. So I think we absolutely do. We get into the weeds about stuff, but I oversee Isaac Center. I also oversee aging service programs for Goddard Riverside and One East Harlem. And I think that we have to be thoughtful about how we network and think differently about how we use resources across the city so that neighborhoods don't get left out. But I think you're absolutely right.
Can I jump in for a quick second? We have someone, we have Madison Thomas from Rebecca C. Wright's office, and she might be an ideal person to talk about what Elaine brought up. How do we persuade government and other entities that we need the resources as much as any other community in the city of New York?
I agree with Aaron's point. I'm the constituent liaison at Rebecca C. Wright's office, so I deal the most with the seniors, and they are probably the most neglected group in the city that gets like less attention on like the resources that they need. So I think it's more of a city issue though, because it's for our district community office than state, but definitely they're in need for those at least attention on those issues.
Madison, what I'd like to do, Peggy, is we'll hear from 3 of our participants who have some questions, and then we may want to discuss whether or not doing a resolution where we call upon the city for enhanced resources to address the food insecurity issues might be a way to go.
Good.
Okay. Carolyn, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. More of a comment, but I appreciate, I'm locating your name. David, thank you for acknowledging those, printing out flyers, because we also, of course, have a huge problem of Wi-Fi insecurity. And I hope that's top of mind for everybody in this room.
Great.
Distributing resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Anne?
Well, to follow up on what Carolyn just said and what David said, is I would like to be sure that everybody on this call and everyone that you are connected to who might need them will reach out to us for our street sheets. We continue to print them. They're pocket size, about this big. They can't be comprehensive, but they're designed to give people a resource, for at least one resource for every meal of the week, as well as other resources for legal advice, for medical care, things like that. We print them precisely because people don't have digital access, or older folks are not as comfortable with digital access. As you mentioned before, you can slip them into a meal that you give out. We want them to be widely distributed. We are in the process of updating them for the COVID environment. We were sort of posting information on our website in the hope that COVID would pass and things would revert from grab and go to sit down meals and what have you. But we are now doing a COVID version. The other thing that we have that I just want to make sure you're all aware of is a hotline. We used to put a social worker at different meal programs 5 nights of the week. So she or he would rotate each night. But with the pivot to grab and go, we're not able to do that. So we've established a phone number with somewhat limited hours, but you can call in English or Spanish with a question about resources or where you can get help. And so people can call us and we'll refer them. If there's something you think we should know about to refer people to, please let us know that. I'll put the phone number in the chat, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew about these resources.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the information, and we'll be happy to figure out a way to be able to help distribute.
Absolutely.
And
thank you.
Thank you. Rita?
Piggybacking on what Elaine said with the population of elderly people that we have in Community Board 8. I have a question. We're discussing what happens when the food is prepared. I want to go back and say, do we do anything in our schools that are teaching students to go into the food preparation of these organizations? I don't know where the food preparation takes place. I don't know if that's germane, but will we have enough people to supply that food if we don't start way back? That's my question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We've run a culinary training program here at the Isaac Center for many years. We're noted in Manhattan as the lead sort of culinary training program for out of school, out of work young adults in New York City. New York City Department of Ed has had a relatively robust culinary training program as well, but what they were finding was a gap between getting trained in the skills and finding employment in the skills. I mean, as we know, the food industry was hit hard through the pandemic, is making steps forward, but is also struggling. I Rita, I think to your point, I think there are a great deal of providers of really comprehensive, thoughtful training programs for children and young adults in food service. The gap comes between that training and actual employment opportunities, because the food industry, or the restaurant sector, food industry, the hospitality sector has not always been embracing and welcoming of some of the trainees that perhaps we've put in place. And so the relationships with employers really matters. The Isaac Center has had some good success with restaurateurs and others. I know other people do too, but it has been put out to us many times. The city could use 1,000 more line cooks. These opportunities are out there, but it's hard work. It's grueling work. It's not work that tends to be paid well to start. And you have to have the right sort of restaurant partner to be able to find employment opportunities that can grow over time. It is my hope that this new city administration will at some point, as it thinks about workforce development, think about meaningful career pathways so that these barriers that are in place get knocked down, so that we can actually see children, young adults, those with interest actually find careers that can lead to substantial enough income to live healthy and freely and independently as time goes on.
Thank you.
Lita?
Thank you. I have one comment, and then I'd like to propose a resolution. My comment is that all of the schools, and I know particularly private schools, have community service requirements. So I'm wondering if I see Greg kind of nodding his head, if the Isaac Center, if the Church of the Holy Trinity work with the schools to get volunteer students to help with everything, and even maybe for those who are interested in a career in the food industry or culinary arts to work in terms of food preparation.
I see Greg's nodding emphatically, and I'm nodding emphatically. I know that for us, that's a happy story. Our biggest challenge is finding enough room for all the volunteers from the schools. Yeah. Right. I get emailed all the time from so many wonderful young people who they often are required to get involved in the local community. But what I love is that they'll still keep coming back, even after they've met their requirements, even after they've graduated, they continue to come. And so we almost have more than we can use. The challenge for us is finding opportunities. So they never want to say no to a young person who wants to get involved in something so meaningful.
Thank you. And hi, David.
Hi,
I also would like to propose a resolution. It's kind of a two-part resolution. One is that asking for the city to provide more resources and more help with the large senior population, elderly population and community board aid, resources for food, for engagement with the community, all kinds of things that matter to the mental and physical health of the elderly population. And the rest of it is that there be more resources provided for food. If the city seems to think that one meal a day is enough, that's not a good thing. And we should be demanding much, much more from the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vanessa?
I just want to, I support Alita's resolution, but I want to ask if we can, does anybody know the status of the Health, Seniors, and Social Services Committee? Like if they have a meeting coming up, because it seems like a resolution that we could ask for that committee to jointly, to join us on.
We don't have anything scheduled at this time.
Who are the chairs? Remind me.
Yeah, Rebecca Dangor, Wilma Johnson, and Barbara Rutter.
And if they don't
that would
have,
just be.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Rebecca has her hand up. So.
Oh, great.
Hi, so I don't want to speak for both of the other co-chairs about this resolution. I have a feeling we would obviously be just totally on board, but I think it's fine if it comes out of this committee based on the, it being an agenda item. We are working on a February meeting. This is not the topic, but I'd be happy to reach out to Barbara and Wilma and add it to a future agenda.
Elaine?
Instead of a resolution, I'd suggest a letter be done to the city. And this can move right forward from the committee itself and not go through any other stages. And
Well,
we can gather a
that's an
letter.
interesting point, yeah, just to get it out. And particularly as the administration is starting to identify different areas and different programmatic needs. I know that the city has a program where they're supposed to be looking at food insecurity over the next decade. And that was started just toward the end of the de Blasio administration. I don't know where it stands, but I do think that my concern is not having anything languish, but really getting the request out there sooner rather than later. What were you thinking, Peggy?
Yeah, I fully agree with this idea of a letter and also what you had to say, Gail. My only additional comment is that what Gail and I had been talking about is that there are all these terrific, as we've heard, programs available in our community, but it seems that so many people don't know about them. And so I've been looking at it, as has Gail as well, from the point of view of telling the public where they are. And we see so many of these hungry people on the street with a cup, and they don't know that around the corner they could get a meal somewhere, which would be so much better for them than 20 cents in the cup. But they don't know where these facilities are. And I'd love to see a lot more ways of publicizing them. Anything from lists on Link New York to, as David had said, more promulgation of our flyer, or ways that the city could get out the word about where these locations are and what they provide. I really just think that given as Gregory was saying, this problem is not going away. We need to step up the information available about where the resources can be accessed. So
But
that's
it could be Elaine.
Well, yeah, you make an assumption, one, they can access any internet or computer type social media. You also make
no, if I may rudely interrupt, no, that's just one way. Okay. I mean, David was talking about handing out flyers. I mentioned that Links New York system, any possible way, even New York One, some sort of whatever it is.
And I think there's also an assumption they don't know where the resources are, because I've talked to, I'm not going to get into that whole other aspect, but I think it needs a more comprehensive type letter, and that we work with the different elected officials in our community, because I know that Liz Kruger's got a master list of programs available. Rebecca does. And I think we need to reach out to them and strategize how we can best inform those who are not connected. And I think a letter to the range of different, I'm losing my battery, a range of different city agencies that are accountable, and make them accountable to our neighborhood. I think that's what has to be done, that we identify in the letter, and I'd be glad to work with you on the range. I mean, it's my old background, and reach out and strategize, because I can hear, city funded types of programs that are politically being very savvy about how wonderful stuff is, but we need to be outside that network. I'm got it. I'm sorry. You get a lot of funding, you can be at risk. David, Trinity is a perfect place to organize with. And we need to then take it on. We can ask the nonprofits who are funded, are they willing to step up to the plate? I've been there as the head of a nonprofit. I know the game. So let us pull together as a community with the different, I mean, our community historically has had all the religious organizations, what do you call them, religious places, unite to provide meals at night, every night for the last 30 plus years. We need to sit down and talk about how do we unite now and ask the city to step up with the funding that our volunteer groups need to do more, including David, all those volunteers. Somebody has to help them. Let's get you some help. So I think it's a broader piece, and we have to begin to hold the electeds accountable and the city agencies. And I'll leave it at that. Some people know where I'm coming from on something that recently has happened about people's in the government's attitude on our neighborhood, and I will not accept it. So thank you. I'm going to leave you there, but I'd say let's do a letter, and let's to the mayor, to the speaker, and the controller, everybody who's now saying, oh, we're on board, and then us organize a group that takes this on. And I'd be glad to be part of that if you want me. You
Thank
may
you,
not.
Elaine.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Rita?
I'm an advertising marketing person. Why don't we have a uniform sign? I'm not talking neon. I'm talking just, an 8x10 sign that this is a place where you can get food. And it could have a space at the bottom as to the hours that it is. I don't know. A man asked me, he was walking. He asked me where he could get lunch, and I couldn't tell him. I sent him to Stanley Isaacs because it's the only one that I know. But, the church that took over the old soccer store, I forget what they're now called. Every time I pass by there, it's dark. And yet when we went to the opening, it was, we're here, we have a pantry, we have this, we have that. I don't see it operational. It just could be the time that I go by. But why couldn't there be a sign, the same sign? It's like the walk sign, one sign that says, this is a place that you can go. And so people on the street know where they can go for something. Just a suggestion.
Thank you. Alita?
Thank you. Very briefly, Brian Lehrer is doing 51 council members over 52 weeks every Tuesday. Next Tuesday, they're going by district number. So next Tuesday is the 4th week, and that would be Keith Powers. And the following week is Julie Menon. So people can call in. I listened this morning, Eric Botcher from West Village up to Columbus Circle. Brian was reading people's tweets. So even if you don't get your phone call picked up, you could send in a tweet, and it's an opportunity to make the point to our elected officials and to a wide city audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tuesday.
Appreciate it. As far as all the attendees here, are we in agreement regarding writing a letter? And it probably becomes two-pronged, because one piece of what Peggy and I have been looking at is getting the word out and looking at different suggestions we've had tonight, which will really be helpful. And I particularly like the idea of printed sheets that can be included, when somebody is getting a meal, But the other piece, figuring out different ways that we can request the city to be more responsive. I understand, for example, that the state passed some legislation that went into effect, I believe, in October, where leftover food that's still good in grocery stores and in supermarkets have to go to food banks. And I don't know, maybe Greg or certainly David could respond to that. Does it just go like to the food bank for New York City and then you get a part of it? It's really hard to know how that funding ends up working. And, you know, if you don't have a specific contract, like David for Holy Trinity Neighborhood Center, how do you get your food? Based on donations, are you able to go to the food bank to purchase it, or how does that work? Because it's important. We don't really, there are little bits and pieces that I think we don't have really a handle on. We just want to make sure that we can be comprehensive enough to indicate that we're really addressing this in the right way.
So the neighborhood center relies entirely on private donations. We have events throughout the year. People write checks, people put money in the plate at church. It's completely voluntary. And we specifically don't seek money from the city, which isn't to say we don't think, as do you, the city has a tremendous responsibility for helping in the homeless and the elderly. But we also know that no matter what the city does, it'll never be enough to solve everybody, help everyone. So we exist on the edges to help wherever we can. But we are purely volunteer based, and we don't get any money from the city. But to the extent that other organizations like the Isaac Center are maybe not getting as much as they can, that has an impact on us as well, right? It means our limited resources are stretched even further than they otherwise would. So we're all in favor, I'm sure, of seeing the city and the state provide more resources to this important need.
Thank you so much. And Greg, maybe as Peggy and I craft the letter, any information that really gives us a handle citywide, but also whatever we know in our neighborhood, because I think Elaine's point is so well taken, that there's the attitude, well, you know, they live on the Upper East Side with an assumption that we are a far wealthier district than happens to be reality, so that when we put together these requests and arguments and suggestions, that we have enough data, you know, so that it's not, well, we just think this is a good idea, but where we can have some statistics kind of woven into the letter would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, I think the starting point is to say, you know, in the city budget, older adults get less than 0.5%, and it's the largest population. It's a growing population, and it's there needs to be more resources. And the city has not made a commitment. There hasn't been an administration in my lifetime in New York City that's made a commitment the way it's needed to address what is this growing and aging population. And this community district is got a significant number of older adults who need access to services. And I think that's kind of the starting point. The number needs to change. And I think the next sort of piece of the puzzle is to say, actually, Mayor Adams, there was if this administration has seen it yet, but right at the end of the de Blasio administration, there was a document that came out that sort of expressed strategies related to addressing hunger and food insecurity in the city. And it was comprehensive, it was thoughtful, it was dynamic. There was a huge number of folks who had a role to play in crafting it. I'm not aware of anyone in city government who's taken that document and said, hey, maybe we should use this, because that's the roadmap. There's a roadmap there, and I'm happy to share that content.
That would be great.
The only other thing I'll note here is that, you know, we at the Isaac Center, we're in the not-for-profit human service sector. We've been doing this, you know, food has been core to Isaac Center for more than 60 years. And it's absolutely true that, you know, we are able to do the work that we do because both there's public dollars and there's private dollars in support. And we work with something like 600 volunteers per year. That was before the pandemic. I think it's actually grown over time. All this to say, that doesn't take our desire to see everyone, volunteers, faith-based institutions, and others committed and connected. I think the key is the collaboration between us to figure out how no one gets left out and behind, left out or left behind. And also, the reality is, at the end of the day, you know, the mutual aid network strategies and others are really key here, because you may have a better sense of what your neighbors need than anybody. So we need to figure out how to address them. So, again, there's a roadmap out there. There's got to be a budget commitment. Our government has to make a commitment in a very different way. But at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to, do I have the street sheet? Am I going to hand it out to someone who needs it? Can we do some billboards? Absolutely. Can we get the word of mouth out there? Can we get a 311 app that is specifically focused on food and food insecurity? Some folks who are comfortable with the digital divide might be able to address that and access it. It's a multi-pronged collective that will result in sort of moving the needle. And I think it's absolutely true that there is need here like there is in every neighborhood.
Thank you so much. Anybody else on the call who has a further comment they'd like to make? If not,
Any other raised hands?
I didn't. Who has a raised hand? I'm sorry.
Oh, I said there were no other raised hands.
No other raised hands. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a marvelous, robust discussion, actually, on food insecurity, but also on independent contractors. Peggy and I appreciate all of you coming, being just so involved and so informative and posing some very good ideas and questions. So thank you again. And with that,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for all your input. Appreciate your attending.
We do. And if anybody would like to move that we adjourn, feel free to do so. Okay. Have a second. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.